Howdy y'all, it's Juliet Necro. This is who I am. When I made my Sonic Adventure video, I had always planned on making 2 Sonic videos in a row. My original plan was for this video to discuss both Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog, but then I realized that I really do not have anything interesting to say about Sonic Heroes, aside from the fact that it was the first game that I followed coverage of and was excited for before its release. Also, if you expect me to play the same game with minor differences 3 times, and then a 4th time with major differences to see the real ending, then your name had better be Yoko Taro. Otherwise, no thank you. This is a theme that will repeat in Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow the Hedgehog was released on November 15th, 2005 in North America, on November 18th, 2005 in Europe, and on December 15th, 2005 in Japan. Naturally, I was aware of it at the time, being an erudite scholar of Nintendo power at the age of 9. By that I mean I mostly looked at the pictures and read the headlines without actually reading the articles. But I definitely remember the reveal of Shadow the Hedgehog. I remember the image of Shadow astride a motorcycle on the cover, implying that he was immediately post-Akira bike slide. Infamously, in his left hand he holds a large handgun. This would become the most widely discussed aspect of Shadow the Hedgehog's design, and we'll get there, but not quite yet. As an 8-year-old at the time, this naturally appealed to all of my sensibilities. Kids in the second half of their first decade want to be like what they think teenagers are like, just like adults want to be what they think adults are like. So I was exactly the target demographic of Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow had been my favorite character in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and in Sonic Heroes, so naturally him getting his own game was basically my dream come true. It's easy, with the benefit of hindsight, to look back on Shadow the Hedgehog and say, who in the world was this game made for? And the answer is that it was made exactly for me as I was in 2005. As far as I can tell, Sega's ethos when creating this game was to appeal to a slightly older audience, but instead they wound up just making the game that their young audience wanted anyway. Shadow the Hedgehog is not an adult game. In fact, I would go so far as to call it juvenile. Its attempts at adulthood are much like those of a child who is decidedly unready for adulthood. It comes off as more adorable than prestigious. Even my friend that I mentioned in the last video, the one who I talked about bonding with over Sonic games, found the idea of Sonic characters carrying guns ridiculous. I suppose that he grew up faster than I did, because I was still absolutely hooked. He laughed at the idea, but the idea of Shadow having a gun was the coolest thing in the world to me. I suppose this was an early failed attempt to assert some pathetic form of masculinity. This was about the age when I was becoming aware of my gender and it was starting to cause me distress, although it wouldn't be terrible until middle and high school. Also, I didn't figure out that my gender was the problem until I was literally 25. In many ways, I consider Shadow the Hedgehog to be the ultimate egg video game. For those of you not blessed with the gift of being transgender, an egg is someone who is trans and does not know it yet. One factor that is common but not necessarily universal to the egg experience is trying much too hard to commit to the gender the egg was assigned at birth. Often these attempts are fairly laughable in retrospect. I staked a lot of my very young, quote, masculinity, end quote, on games like Shadow the Hedgehog, as previously discussed in my Zero Ranger video. I received Shadow the Hedgehog as a Christmas present in 2005. Really, it was all I cared about getting at Christmas that year. From that day, up to a point I don't recall, I called it my favorite game to anyone who would listen. I believe the next game I called my favorite was Super Metroid. I don't know when it changed. Despite saying I loved this game, I only ever finished it once as a kid and never really revisited it like I did the Sonic Adventure games. I decided while making the Sonic Adventure video that I should probably revisit Shadow the Hedgehog. I'll be honest and say that when I decided to make a Shadow the Hedgehog video, I hoped that I would find that I still enjoyed the game. I was hoping I could title this video something like Shadow the Hedgehog, a misunderstood classic, or Shadow the Hedgehog is better than you think, and clickbait people. Now that I've replayed the game, though, for me to make a video like that would be dishonest. This game is not good. In a strange way, I'm relieved. I was worried after I was a bit soft on the Sonic Adventure games, that I'm too nostalgia blind to ever dislike a game I liked as a kid. But in this case, my inner critic wrestled the controls away from my inner child. Nostalgia blindness is a blight upon society, and I was worried after the Sonic Adventure video that I was coming down with a case. However, I have put those fears to bed by playing Shadow the Hedgehog. It's time to rip this game's heart out and drink its blood. I don't want to be a negative channel often. being an overly angry critic of media online is out of fashion these days. But just this once, I hope you'll indulge me in killing an old darling. All that being said, here we go. Chapter 1. The Aesthetic. When I was a child, all of our game consoles were hooked up to a TV in what my brother and I called our game room. It was a spare bedroom that we used primarily as our place to play with toys and video games. However, it was a Christmas tradition when I was young that during the Christmas holiday from school, our parents would let us bring a game console downstairs and hook it up to the family room TV. I distinctly remember the first time I fell into a bottomless pit while playing Shadow the Hedgehog. It was then that I heard Shadow the Hedgehog utter the words, "Damn, not here," as he fell into the pit.
Damn, not here.
My brother and I were flabbergasted. We were both inveterate Nintendo babies, so cursing in video games was basically unheard of to us. Naturally, many video games included swearing and much more salacious content before, during, and after this time, but we had been insulated from it by the kind of games we played. As part of its bid to be seen as darker and edgier, Shadow the Hedgehog sprinkles in very light swears like damn and hell into its script. Once again, this attempt at maturity makes the game feel more juvenile than the ones that don't contain cursing. Shadow the Hedgehog's script curses very much like the way a child curses when they know what the words are, but don't quite have a sense of when and where to use them effectively. Obviously, there is no cursing rulebook, but it just feels off. The most infamous example, of course, is...
Where's that damn fourth Chaos Emerald?
It's notable that this is the first sentence in the cutscene. Shadow opens the scene already incredibly frustrated at his inability to find the fourth Chaos Emerald. And no matter what the previous stage was, this does not follow. He was not particularly annoyed by the Chaos Emerald hunt before this scene, so it comes off as a jarring escalation in emotion. It gives the sense that he's been hunting for the fourth Chaos Emerald all day, even though the fourth Chaos Emerald hasn't even come up before this scene. This is the most infamous sample of the way this game uses language, but it's far from the only example. Have a look at this ending where Shadow says, "I'm going to destroy this damn planet."
With the power of these emeralds, I'm going to destroy this damn planet.
That sentence reads on the page like he's annoyed with the planet in question, like someone saying, "I'm going to destroy this damn printer." It comes off as stilted when the actor has to try and sell it as a biting line, when it just doesn't sound right to my ears. It's an example of when not cursing and using an adjective instead would have made for a better line. If I were writing this game, I might have had him say, "I'm going to destroy this rotten planet," or "I'm going to destroy this worthless planet." Every time this game curses, it feels like that. To me, it sounds like the script was done, and the cursing was added in after the fact in order to make the game seem more adult. Instead, it has the opposite effect. I thought it was silly even as a child, once I got over my initial shock. It really is incredible how thoroughly this game is permeated with mid-2000s edge. The menus even have a grungy and decayed feeling compared to the Sonic Adventure games and Sonic Heroes. This is actually a good decision. It gives the menus a more unique feel. On the other hand, the sound effect for making it a selection is a stock gunshot sound effect, which is extremely funny. The game wants you to know that it's a deeply serious and dark character study, y'all. They promise. This is the first Sonic game where Sega opted to use the same voice cast as the Sonic X anime in English. If you're about my age and your first language is English, you probably watched Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And a few other dubbed anime on TV, so you probably heard the work of 4Kids Entertainment. And saw their work too, for that matter, because they were infamous for altering not only the scripts, but also the footage of the shows they dubbed, to remove anything deemed too adult or too Japanese. Obnoxious modern-day weeaboos are always complaining about localizers supposedly adding their agenda to their work, but this is essentially the one time that it actually happened. Bridget is trans and Japanese too. Sorry, fellas. Go cry about it. Anyway, this is the game that established the Sonic voice cast who'd hold on to these roles until getting replaced again in 2010 by the current voice cast. They mostly do just fine and fit their characters well, with a few exceptions. Because of the era I grew up in, though, nobody will ever sound right as Sonic but Ryan Drummond for me. I mean no disrespect to Jason Griffith or Roger Craig Smith, but it's always going to be Ryan for me. This is also Mike Pollock's first game as Dr. Eggman, and it's interesting to go back and see how much his take on the character has evolved. He didn't get replaced when the cast got shuffled a second time, so he's been playing Eggman in Sonic games for almost 20 years at this point. Good on him. Also, Charmy Bee gives me awful flashbacks to May's brother Max from the Hoenn arc of the Pokemon anime. Ugh. One fun thing is that the villain of the piece, who's literally called Black Doom because this game is very subtle, is voiced by Sean Schemmel. He does a voice that sounds more unhealthy for the throat than the 23 years he's been screaming his lungs out as Son Goku.
You've deliberately disobeyed me, Shadow.
Shadow, get my pizza rolls out of the oven.
Also, literally every gun soldier is voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, which is very funny. Suzaku Kururugi, they are not. Let's talk about this game's visuals a bit. I already mentioned the menus, but how does this game look when you're actually playing it? For starters, it's aesthetically similar to Sonic Adventure 2, which makes sense. These are the two games that most focus on shadow, after all. It's a bit grungier and grimier than Sonic Adventure 2, like I said. The one thing that's incongruous with that is the character models. This game mostly uses the same character models as Sonic Heroes. Rouge's model is different, and I think Shadow's might be as well, but otherwise they're identical. It's odd because the character models in Heroes have a very toy-like sheen to them and very simple colors, which clashes somewhat with Shadow's grungy environments. It's definitely the most noticeable when one of these characters shares a screen with a character designed for Shadow the Hedgehog, like Black Doom or the Gun Commander. Character models for enemies and bosses fit in with the aesthetic much better than the Sonic characters do. In all likelihood, the team didn't have time to create new models for this game, even if they wanted to. It did release less than 2 years after Sonic Heroes, after all, and Sonic Team most likely already had Sonic 06 on their radar. No sense in making nice new models when you have to replace them for a new console just on the horizon. The thing that I always think about when I think of the aesthetic of Shadow the Hedgehog, though, is the overuse of bloom. Any light source in this game is blown out really hard. It's especially notable on levels like Prison Island, where you have to ride the floating discs over toxic goop that glows an eye-searing shade of puke green. It's quite hard to look at. Sometimes it can make the gameplay really difficult. For example, in Lethal Highway, you have to shoot this tank's shield to destroy it. The pieces of the shield that fly off are really bad to look at, and there are a whole lot of them. It is not a nice effect, and this game is full of smaller but still annoying examples of this kind of bloom. It's very much the style at the time, though. With its darker palette and overuse of bloom, Shadow the Hedgehog actually kind of prefigures the so-called brown and bloom era we saw in the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era. There are a few points where this game compromises its more serious tone in order to earn the recently created E10 Plus rating instead of a T rating. When defeated, human gun soldiers don't actually die, they lie on the ground and beg for their lives instead. Aliens get to explode into bloody chunks, but the humans are apparently a bridge too far. In addition, the alien characters bleed green when damaged. The aliens actually bled red blood in pre-release materials, but that seems to have been changed during development to bring the rating down. Targeting the E10 Plus rating in North America seems an odd choice if you're trying to court a more mature demographic. 10-year-olds aren't even out of elementary school yet. It's the same problem we have now, where a lot of films are kind of sanitized now to get a PG-13 instead of an R rating. One last note on aesthetics, and that's that the music still rips. It is a Sonic soundtrack, after all. Any soundtrack that Jun Senoue contributed to is gonna go hard. Someday, Daisuke Ishiwatari and Jun Senoue should collaborate on a soundtrack. I think if they did, I would somehow get pregnant from it despite being transgender. That's a lot about how Shadow the Hedgehog looks and sounds, but how does it feel to actually play? Chapter 2. Actually playing Shadow the Hedgehog. The answer is, this game does not play great. On a basic level, it plays a lot like the Sonic Adventure games and Sonic Heroes. A particularly brave person might argue that Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, and Sonic 06 should be called Sonic Adventure 3 through 5, but I am not opening that semantic can of worms today. The point is, the basic control feels more or less like Sonic Heroes especially. The difference, of course, is that we're now only controlling Shadow rather than 3-character teams that Heroes used. Even on a basic control level, this game has some flaws to it. Shadow builds up to his maximum running speed very quickly. Too quickly. In the older Sonic games, moving at your maximum speed was a little gameplay reward for skill and/or level knowledge. In this game, Shadow gets going almost instantly, and his handling is horrible once he's moving at speed. The real problem with this is that the level design is not made to accommodate this kind of movement at all. Later Sonic games also make the character handle more like a race car at full speed, but those games' levels are based around long straightaways or corners you can drift around. Shadow the Hedgehog has to contend with sharp 90-degree turns, objectives off the beaten path, and doors that open too slow. That is one of my biggest game design pet peeves. If your game has automatic doors, make them open fast enough that my character doesn't smash their face into every door they come across. Shadow's speed does not serve this game well. Every level in Shadow the Hedgehog has at least 2 objectives to complete, and many have 3, and usually only one of them is reach the end of the stage. Oftentimes, these objectives will require combing every inch of the level to try and find items or enemies, or shoot down airships, or power up crystals, or what have you. It's very easy to get moving quickly, blow past the thing you wanted to grab, and have to sheepishly turn back to retrieve it. And we'll get to those mission objectives, don't you worry. The momentum also presents a problem because a lot of levels have required vehicle sections, or other factors that stop your momentum. Being fast like the other Sonic games doesn't serve this game's design well. It betrays a lack of confidence. This game is trying to do its own thing, but it's too scared to fully commit to it, so it still has holdovers from games where those designed ideas worked better. Speaking of trying to do its own thing, let's talk about this game's weapons. They're naturally one of this game's most infamous features. The very idea of Shadow wielding a gun is well-trodden ground for jokes, but people fail to consider that they're actually not very fun to use either. To start off with, Shadow wields every weapon in this game like it's a handgun, no matter how large it is, which looks completely ridiculous. They're also resized to fit Shadow's cartoonish gloved hands. Long guns sway wildly around when Shadow is running and clip through the geometry left and right. The most egregious example is the miniguns that Shadow can pick up from the gun robots in certain stages. The thing is several times longer than Shadow is tall, and still he swings it around like it's a 9mm pistol, and it looks absolutely laughable. Also laughable is the actual gunplay. Shadow automatically targets the nearest enemy and fires with almost unwavering accuracy, unless the enemy is flying around or moving quickly. Most ground-based enemies have no such luck. Most enemies are absolutely melted by gunfire, particularly as Shadow is using an automatic weapon. It takes almost all the challenge out of fighting regular enemies. Even bosses get melted by gunfire. You can beat Eggman's mid-boss robot in less than 30 seconds if you just shoot it in the head with the provided machine gun turrets enough times. Here's a clip.
This is what you get for turning against your master. Gah! Gah! Know your place, android! Damn it. Oh, you asked for it. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Time. Lights up! Lights up! Lights up! Lights up! Next time we meet, you won't be so lucky. Just you wait and see.
It's very amusing to me that the guns, the element of gameplay added to make this game stand out as mature in comparison to its peers, instead make it an incredibly breezy game. This game is a cakewalk. It is so easy. In another example of how easy this game is, this is the first Sonic game in which getting hit doesn't cause you to lose all of your rings. In this game, you only lose 10 rings on hit. This game is still just as generous with rings as other Sonic games, though. I don't understand why they made this change. The health system based on rings was one of the defining features of Sonic gameplay. It's such a great idea for a health system because it allows for theoretically infinite hits as long as the player can grab a ring. That moment of panic as you scramble to grab a few rings after a hit is a lot of fun in other Sonic games. In Shadow the Hedgehog, you probably already have 30 rings before you see the first enemy in the game, and the enemies have not been made more aggressive to compensate for how much more hits the player can take in a row without dying. The enemies in this game are in fact laughably passive. A lot of them have firearms, but they take so long to line up a shot and fire that you'll probably turn them into Swiss cheese with your own weapon before they get a chance to attack. I would go so far as to say that it's a source of tonal dissonance in what is supposed to be the darkest Sonic game. When a game is yelling constantly that it's very mature and wants to be taken seriously, you would expect its gameplay to match. Obviously, not every game with mature themes has challenging gameplay, nor should they, but I feel in this case a little more difficulty would make sense. Oh, by the way, this game also has melee weapons. They too are ridiculous, but because they're ineffective, not because they're overly effective like the guns are. Another gameplay issue is that this game is insultingly handholdy. Admittedly, this is at least partially a holdover from Sonic Heroes. In that game, you control 3 characters at once, and they have quite a bit of banter throughout the game. It was balanced in that game by the fact that a lot of the exchanges gave characterization. On the other hand, a lot of the lines were simply pointing out very obvious details or saying, "Hey look, enemies!" A lot of the dialogue during gameplay in Shadow the Hedgehog is pretty similar. In this game, you only control Shadow. However, if you are doing a Dark or Hero mission, you will have another character following you, basically doing nothing but reminding you of the objective. In many cases, these characters will say something like, try going up, or let's go down, in a level that's almost completely linear. At that point, it just feels like an assault on the player's intelligence. You can't even escape it by ditching your NPC allies and doing the neutral mission, because in that case, Shadow will start doing the talking for himself. I haven't experienced hand-holding this egregious since I last played a Pokemon game, heyo! Again, this game fails at seeming mature by assuming that its players can't figure out very obvious things. The other thing that your follower NPC allies love to do is scold you. Most levels in Shadow the Hedgehog are populated by two different factions of enemies. You've got gun soldiers, the hostile alien Black Arms, and Eggman and his robots as a third faction. Whenever you are doing a mission for a character, they will scold you whenever you attack an enemy of the corresponding faction. It's also worth noting that you often have to attack enemies to progress through a stage, such as to open doors or unlock crates with necessary items. Your NPC follower will still get all bent out of shape at you even if you're doing something that the game made unavoidable. Enemies attack you regardless of which objective you're going for, so naturally you're going to want to defend yourself. It's just another annoyance to add to the pile. It would have been a great integration of the story and gameplay if choosing to work with a faction would prevent those enemies from attacking you, and open up doors blocked by them. In addition, the gun commander canonically hates Shadow and orders his troops to kill him on sight, so maybe they could still attack Shadow if you're doing hero missions. It would be a nice bit of gameplay and story integration, and possibly explain Shadow's decision to side with the aliens in some endings. As it stands, you're just gonna have to deal with Black Doom scolding you for killing his troops, when the level design left you with no other option. Speaking of options, this game has many, and it's also longer than the two Sonic Adventure games. Sonic Adventure 2, for example, has 31 stages in total, between 16 in Hero Story and 14 in Dark Story, plus Canon's Core. Should I be embarrassed that I know that off the top of my head? Sound off in the comments below. Sonic Heroes has 14 stages, but requires 4 playthroughs with the game's different teams in order to see the final ending, for a total of 56 stages. For most of your playtime with Sonic Heroes, you'll be playing stages you've already played at least once before, with varying levels of variation. This is a problem that's compounded in Shadow the Hedgehog. In this game, you complete 6 stages to receive an ending. And I say an ending deliberately because this game has 10. You travel to different stages by completing the hero, dark, or neutral mission in each stage. Therefore, to see the true ending of Shadow the Hedgehog, you have to play 61 stages total. 6 times 10 for the 10 endings, and then the final stage on the lead up to the final boss. Now, repetition was already bad in Sonic Heroes, but it's even worse here. I said that to fully finish the game you have to finish 61 stages, but I left out the crucial detail that fully 10 of them, a whole 16%, are just the game's first stage, Westopolis. No game should ever force you to play the same stage 10 times, under any circumstances. In addition, this means you'll have to beat the final 5 stages 2 times each. There's breathing room in the middle, but each of these must also be completed twice. There's only a few bosses that appear multiple times each in the levels, meaning that it's possible to fight the same boss twice in a 6th level run. And you don't even have to take a weird route through the game to make that happen. You fight Black Bull twice if you do nothing but hero missions to get the pure good ending, for example. The 2 Black Bull fights are a little different from each other, but still, I think it's a pretty unusual design decision. The 10 endings each only share 3 different final boss fights, meaning that to see the true ending, you have to fight Black Doom 3 times, Sonic and Diablon 3 times, and the Egg Dealer 4 times. I don't even want my favorite boss fight of all time to be in the game 4 times. Anyway, this much repetition of content is unconscionable in any story-driven game. It's fine and even makes sense for a shoot-'em-up or other arcade-style experience, but any game where you're supposed to be invested in the story should not repeat this way unless the repetition is part of the narrative, like in Zero Ranger. Granted, there are 3 missions to do in most stages, and every stage except the last way has at least 2, but there's no way to play Westopolis without repeating content. 10 times with this stage. No meaningful differentiation between them. Let's talk about those different missions. Every level has a character to follow you for both the hero and dark missions on the stage. Usually your hero companion is one of the other core Sonic characters, and your dark companion is Black Doom or Dr. Eggman, depending on the stage. While the neutral path usually entails reaching the end of the stage, Much like in Sonic and Shadow stages in the Sonic Adventure games, the other two paths' objectives are usually much more involved. They can range from killing every enemy of the opposing faction in the level, hunting down items, finding a hidden area, or collecting a lot of rings. Without a doubt, the most irritating objective you get in any of these levels is destroying an enemy vehicle. This is fairly simple to do in Lethal Highway, where you just have to keep up with the alien tank and continually shoot it. However, the other two times you have to do this are downright onerous. In Air Fleet, you have to constantly slow down to jump on platforms that raise you up high enough for Shadow's lock-on to target the President's escape pod with his weapon. Shooting the escape pod gives so little feedback to the player that Black Doom literally has a voice line to reassure you that you're doing it right. If you've got a voice line like that in your game, you need to go back and reassess what you've done. Please, for the sake of everyone's time and comfort. The other of the 3 vehicle destruction missions is the hero mission on Iron Jungle. For this one, you have to shoot at Eggman's Zeppelin, and the weapon they primarily give you to do that is one of the few that has no auto-aim and no vertical aiming whatsoever. I actually completely failed this mission and had to start this level over because it has very little margin for error. You have to be pumping rockets into that blimp every second you can, or you'll fail. Not a good time. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I realize that not a single one of the hero or dark missions is more enjoyable than just reaching the end of the stage for the neutral path. I'm not going to break down every single stage in this game like I did in Sonic Adventure 2. However, instead I'm going to talk about the very worst stage in this game and a few that I like. One stage in this game is so obnoxious that I actually restarted this run, meaning that I played the game 10.5 times and played the contemptible Westopolis 11 times in the course of gathering footage for this video. I then realized that I forgot to click record before starting the 11th run. Ah, crap baskets. Oh well, I went back and got footage of the cutscenes from that run anyway. The level in question is the 4th stage on a pure evil run, Central City. This stage is one of the few non-linear levels in this game, and its mission requires the player to either detonate 5 large bombs for the Dark mission, or defuse 20 bombs for the Hero mission. The problem is that this level does an absolutely terrible job of guiding the player from place to place. The whole level looks absolutely the same, and it features a lot more verticality than most of the levels in this game. It should be noted that this game does not allow you to control the camera vertically, only horizontally. Almost all of the Dark mission bombs are above you. You do the math. Please actually do the math for me. I can't do it. I can't do math. Please. Central City is a huge pain to navigate, and if you get turned around even a single time, good luck reorienting yourself again. Also, this whole level is timed. You would think that the timer is pretty generous when first starting, but you'll need every second of it if you even succeed. I was so frustrated by this level that I gave up on trying to finish it, taking an alternate route to the pure evil ending. I genuinely appreciate that this game's free-form progression means you can completely bypass a stage that you don't want to play, and I took advantage of that here. The most interesting levels in this game are the 2 flashback stages. 2 of the stages in Shadow the Hedgehog, Lost Impact and The Doom, take place 50 years ago, before and during the scuttling of the Space Colony Ark. Lost Impact can be found on the Pure Hero path, and it takes place prior to the destruction of the colony. Your partner is Maria, and her mission is to destroy the 60 artificial chaos that have escaped containment. Meanwhile, the Doom takes place during the attack on the colony that was mentioned back in Sonic Adventure 2. In this level, you have 3 missions. The Dark mission is to kill all of the gun soldiers attacking the colony. The Neutral mission is to simply escape, while Maria's Hero mission is to render first aid to the scientists targeted by the soldiers. I like these 2 levels a lot, in some ways. They're interesting for narrative reasons, because they remind Shadow of what he lost and why he might want to protect humanity for Maria's sake, or blame them for her death and condemn them. Especially in The Doom, where Black Doom repeatedly whispers in his ear about how awful humanity is for having done this to him. To play, though, they're just as miserable as a lot of the other missions. A lot of the areas in these levels look practically identical, making them very difficult to navigate. I believe it took me over 15 minutes to beat each of these levels, which is ridiculously long for a Sonic level. As I said before, the most fun ending to go for is the completely neutral ending, which takes you from Westopolis to Glyphic Canyon to Prison Island to Sky Troops to Iron Jungle to Lava Shelter. When you're just running from one end of the stage to the other, it's not great due to some aforementioned issues with the controls and the level design, But it's at least better than having to backtrack and comb these levels for tchotchkes or people to murder. The path of least resistance in this case turns out to be the most fun. And even then, it's not so much fun as less irritating. And speaking of irritating, Chapter 3, The Multiple Ending Snafu. As I've said, Shadow the Hedgehog features 10 different possible endings, and this was one of its selling points. The tagline on the back of the game case was hero or villain, of course. Multiple endings are one of those features that set video games apart compared to other artistic mediums. There are a few movies or books that have alternate endings for various reasons, such as my favorite movie, Army of Darkness. But video games often have multiple endings because, unlike most storytelling mediums, they leave room for the player to have agency. If a player is a participant in a story rather than having it play out before them, then it's only fair that they have some say in its conclusion. Different games handle this with different degrees of skill. Some games have so-called good and bad endings, with the implication that one is the real ending and is usually more difficult to obtain. This is more like a secret than the kinds of alternate endings I'm referring to. One of the most common and least interesting ways for games to have alternate endings is to allow the player to decide whether their character is good or evil, and changing the ending to fit that. I'm truthfully kind of tired of this kind of ending choice. Bomber Guy spoke on this a great deal in his video on Fallout 3, but it's worth repeating. Games don't really let you be evil in interesting ways, because that would shake up the design too much. In a lot of games, choosing to be good versus evil is basically choosing whether to be a goody little two-shoes or to be the dang Joker. Being mean for no reason isn't interesting. Real people aren't jerks for fun. Well, most aren't. So just being a jerk in a video game isn't my idea of a good time. That's not to mention all of the times where this kind of morality system just boils down to hero or hero parentheses jerk. The Mass Effect trilogy even acknowledges the fact that that's what the choices are by labeling them Paragon and Renegade instead of good and evil. When prompted on whether I want to be a goody little two-shoes or not, I'd rather be able to respond, good? Bad? I'm the gal with the gun. The most interesting way of doing multiple endings is not to make a moral judgment and let the player decide for themselves how things should end. And guess what? The trans girl video essayist is about to talk about Fallout New Vegas and the Souls series. Surprise, surprise. In Fallout New Vegas, the party you choose to control the city is likely going to at least partially depend on you yourself and how your experiences have shaped your opinions. I'm a socialist goth trans girl, so naturally the only Vegas I'll accept is one ruled by Yes Man. It's also why I'll never trust anybody who went with Caesar's Legion on their first playthrough. Dark Souls 1 and 3 do something similar, but more subtly. In these two games, you have the option of linking the first flame and continuing the Age of Fire, or letting it burn out and ushering in an Age of Dark. By the time you reach the endgame, you've gotten a taste of how much the Age of Fire sucks, but you've also gotten a hint that the Age of Dark might suck too, with all of the monsters from the Abyss running around. It's up to the player to decide whether the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. I personally go for the Age of Dark, at least in 3, where you don't have to fight the damn 4 kings so early. So how does Shadow the Hedgehog handle its multiple endings? For starters, there are 10 of them. For simplicity's sake, I'll refer to them as ending number 1 through ending number 10, with number 1 being the pure dark ending and number 10 being the pure hero ending. So the higher the number, the gooder the shadow. In ending number 1, Shadow sides with Black Doom in the end, calling for the destruction of Earth. If you reached this ending, you saw a lot of Black Doom in Shadow's ear, implying that it's his destiny to help the alien Black Arms destroy the human race. Shadow's main motivation to side with the Black Arms is that Black Doom promises to tell him about his past if Shadow sides with him. And he does, in a sense, although through his own lens. In this ending, Shadow sees himself as judgment upon humanity for their sins, and he's going to destroy this damn planet. In ending number 2, Shadow betrays Black Doom at the last minute and defeats him, taking the Chaos Emeralds for himself. He resolves to conquer the world on his own. This is the first of what I'll call the what the heck endings. To get this ending, you have to reach the pure evil final stage and then decide to go do the good mission at the last second. So there can't really be cutscenes that foreshadow this ending. Shadow seemingly grows his new ambition out of nowhere. In ending number 3, Shadow sides with Black Doom and becomes his servant to enslave humanity. This is basically a rewording of ending number 1, but a bit toned down. It's one of the least interesting because it's so indistinct. In ending number 4, Eggman, for some reason on the alien homeworld, demands that Shadow give him the Chaos Emeralds, which Shadow refuses, and they fight. Shadow wins and asserts that no one can tell him what to do before killing Eggman. The edgy teenager ending.
Goodbye, Doctor.
In endings 5 and 6, Eggman lies that Shadow is not the original Shadow, but one of his android replicas. In ending number 5, Shadow chooses to kill Eggman and take over the Eggman Empire for himself, while in ending number 6, he kills Eggman while setting his goal of surpassing the original Shadow, not knowing that he is the original.
Goodbye, Doctor.
I do not enjoy all of the Eggman peril in this game. We do not stand for Eggman peril in this house. In endings number 7 and number 8, Shadow is confronted by the gun commander, who blames Shadow for his family being killed in the massacre aboard the space colony Ark. In ending number 7, Shadow appoints himself the guardian of the Ark, exiling Eggman and letting him live. In number 8, he blames himself for what happened to the Ark, and laments his own creation in what is probably the saddest ending. In ending number 9, Shadow sides with the heroes but betrays them at the last second to declare himself the, quote, ultimate Hedgehog, end quote. This is the other what the heck ending, because as the other big swerve, it was basically impossible to foreshadow. Also, wouldn't Shadow being the ultimate life form and a hedgehog already make him the ultimate Hedgehog? 0 out of 10, terrible game. In ending number 10, Shadow becomes the hero and defeats Black Doom with Sonic's help. This one calls to mind the promise that Shadow made to Maria 50 years ago, and reiterated in Sonic Adventure 2. This ending is foreshadowed by the heroic flashback stage, where Shadow reunites with Maria to protect people. So many of these endings are silly, yeah? Some of them are just ridiculous, like Shadow calling himself the ultimate Hedgehog and acting like that's the conclusion of his character arc. Completely out of left field stuff. The problem with the writing in this game is that it makes Shadow out to be really gullible. Sonic Heroes revealed that Shadow survived the end of Sonic Adventure 2 but lost his memories, and his arc revolves around figuring out his identity. If you watch the cutscenes in this game, Shadow just goes along with whatever the last person told him, taking their words at face value. The 3 characters that try to exert the most influence on Shadow are Black Doom, Eggman, and the Gun Commander. He has no reason to trust any of them, though. Black Doom is an alien who keeps vaguely promising to tell Shadow about his past in exchange for help in gathering the Chaos Emeralds. Shadow really shouldn't be as trusting of him as he is. I mean, his name is literally Black Doom. He has no reason to trust Eggman either, considering he spent the whole last game fighting him, and a lot of this game too. On the other hand, there's only one cutscene where Shadow and the Gun Commander meet face to face besides their boss fight, and it's one of the best in the game, because Shadow doesn't just take the Gun Commander's interpretation of what happened on the Ark at face value. Depending on the player's choice in the next stage, he can interpret it in 2 ways, which lead to endings number 7 or 8. The whole thing is very funny as well, because it hinges on the idea that none of Shadow's friends, like Sonic or Rouge, filled him in about his past between when Sonic Heroes ended and this game begins. I like to imagine that Shadow was about to go have a lunch date with Rouge, where she was going to tell him everything, but then Black Doom and his alien buddies showed up instead. But all of this is ignoring the biggest problem with the multiple endings in this game, and that's that none of them are actually the real ending anyway. Chapter 4, the actual ending. After you get each of the 10 endings, the game's last story opens up, just like the Sonic Adventure games and Sonic Heroes. The last story opens with Shadow going to hand over the Chaos Emeralds to Black Doom in exchange for information about his past. Turns out, none of these endings you spent your playtime going for actually matter, because the last story doesn't have any relation to any of them, except for the fact that Shadow has collected the Chaos Emeralds. If you were writing a Wikipedia summary of this game's plot, the 60 levels you just played could be summarized in one sentence. Shadow goes and collects the Chaos Emeralds. Why force the player through all of that repetition to see different perspectives, when it literally does not affect the outcome of the story at all? The back of the box implied that the player would have a hand in shaping Shadow's destiny, but you quite literally do not have a choice but to watch Shadow hand over the Chaos Emeralds. Naturally, upon handing them over, Black Doom reveals that he has effortlessly played Shadow, and uses the Chaos Emeralds to teleport the Black Comet down to Earth so that the aliens can start eating the humans. He also reveals that Professor Gerald needed his help to create Shadow. Shadow is made up of alien DNA, so in a way, Black Doom is his father. Naturally, Shadow is not pleased with this news. Black Doom then uses a gas to paralyze everyone on the planet. Luckily, Shadow is immune thanks to his alien DNA, and sets off alone to stop Black Doom, deciding finally to not let the past define him. So far, this setup is great. The whole game, Shadow has been misled and manipulated by knowledge of his past, or promises of that knowledge. So the ultimate message of the game being that one should look to the future instead is a good one. This will become a problem in literally the very next cutscene. The last story includes a single level, The Last Way. This stage has a few points where you're required to use the hero side chaos power, Chaos Control, to progress. It's a neat little use of the mechanics to show that Shadow has committed to being a hero. Now that that's over, the frustrating disconnect in the story arrives. Black Doom stops Shadow in his tracks again by reminding him that he is technically Shadow's father. With some accidental help from the Chaotix, Shadow sees a recorded message by Professor Gerald. Gerald says that he made a mistake by making contact with Black Doom to help with the Ultimate Lifeform project. He knew all along that the Black Comet would return in 50 years, so he created the Eclipse Cannon so that Shadow could destroy the Black Comet. He basically says, Shadow, you were always meant to be a hero. This is who you are. This is a cowardly narrative decision. If the theme statement they're going for is don't let your past define you, then it's really counterproductive to have a character come out and say, don't worry, Shadow, you were always supposed to be a hero anyway. It would have been more interesting if Professor Gerald had said that the aliens arriving was a backup plan, in case his plans to destroy the Earth by crashing the colony back in Sonic Adventure 2 failed. To be fair, though, this message was recorded before his message in Sonic Adventure 2, since it's before the government raided the Ark. Anyway, Shadow uses the Chaos Emeralds to become Super Shadow, defeats Black Doom, and destroys the Black Comet with the Eclipse Cannon. The ending afterwards is a bit abrupt. The other characters all celebrate, while Shadow stands on the Ark holding a photo of Gerald and Maria. He tosses the photo away and says, "Goodbye forever, Shadow the Hedgehog," mirroring Sonic saying, "Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog," in the same room 2 games ago. Shadow is leaving behind all of the baggage associated with his name and living free from the expectations of his past now. Hence, he leaves his name behind, figuratively of course, because he's still called Shadow the Hedgehog in the next game. Hey, you know what other demographic likes to leave their old names behind? Chapter 5. Well, this is a bit like being transgender, isn't it? I want to preface this chapter. I don't believe that it was the developers' intention to make a trans or even a queer narrative when they made this game. I'm not even necessarily saying that it's my interpretation. I'm really just doing this as a teaching example, because Shadow displays a lot of traits that are also displayed by eggs, that is, people who are transgender but have not realized it yet. At the beginning of the story, Shadow has very little sense of his identity. Before I realized that I'm a woman, this is also true for me. I had a lot of thoughts like, is this who I am? Or to quote the best Dark Souls game, is this my true self? When someone called me by the name I was given at birth, I responded to it, but the thought in my head was, I guess that's me. Now that I know, and someone calls me by the name Juliet that I chose for myself, my brain leaps to say, yes, that's me. Shadow doesn't know who he is, and that causes him a lot of distress. He's haunted by it. This leads him to be manipulated by those, like Black Doom and Dr. Eggman, who offer to define him themselves so he doesn't have to. Before I came out, I defined myself a lot by organizations that I was involved in, or by places that I was from, but was unable to explain who I was on a deep level without falling back on those things I was involved in. I knew what I did and where I was from, but not who I was. The cringiest phase in my life was the one in which I decided to make being from Texas the majority of my personality when I first went to college. Rough times for Egg Juliet. In the same way, Shadow tries on a lot of different identities in the various endings, but doesn't truly find himself in them. It's only at the end, when he stops letting others define him and states who he is truthfully, that he can truly transition to being a hero. With all that being said, should you play Shadow the Hedgehog? Absolutely not. This game is tedious at best and frustrating at worst. It was only fun for me because I played it as a little kid, and even then I knew it was kind of hokey. If you're playing it for the first time as an adult, you'll probably get less than nothing out of it. I had hoped that I was going to be able to make a video where I called this game Camp, and I was going to quote that Susan Sontag essay like a good little YouTube video essayist. But the camp is not worth the effort of accessing it. The entertainment value of the cutscenes is not worth the negative entertainment value of actually playing the game. Leave this game in the past where it belongs. I made this video as proof that it's okay to reassess the things you enjoyed as a kid and say, wow, this sucked actually. And wow, Shadow the Hedgehog sucks actually. Thank you all for watching. If you like this video, please be sure to subscribe to the channel. Have a happy holiday and I'll see you in the new year. Till next time, ciao. I don't want to be a negative channel often. Being an overly angry critic of media online is out of fashion these days. To start off with, Shadow wields every weapon in this